Chapter 18. And it came to pass after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, and said, Go and show yourself to Ahab, and I'll send rain on the earth. And verse 2, Elijah went to show himself to Ahab, and there was famine in Samaria. You know the story. You see, there was a drought for 3 years. Now, I don't see at the moment the particular significance in the 3 years. But what I do see is this, that God had to fulfill his purposes. And these don't always happen according to our time scale. Now, my testimony has been, and you all know my testimony, that twice I was healed of cancer. When I was 32 years old, it was throat cancer, and when I was 70 years old, it was lung cancer. But in both cases, the miracle did not happen immediately. It happened in God's time. In both cases, I had to wait 3 months for the answer. It's like when I was in the prison. Now, I quoted to the Lord Paul and Silas. Well, God got them out within a matter of days. It's the same with Peter and John. They got out quickly. With me, I actually spent virtually a year in the prison. But it was God's timing. If I'd not been in the prison for that length of time, I would not have had the miracle with the Prime Minister coming. All that took time. And I had to get through the trial, be found guilty, and be sentenced. That took 4 months. And I appealed against it. That added another 3 months onto it. But the fact is this. God does answer, but the timing is in his hand. You've got to trust him. So, in chapter 18, now Elijah goes back to Ahab and says, I will send rain on the earth. But it didn't happen immediately, as you know. And what had happened was that Obadiah, Ahab called Obadiah, and unfortunately he feared the Lord. Verse 4, it was so when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord that Obadiah took 150 prophets, that's prophets of God, hid them 50 by 50 in a cave, and he fed them with bread and water. So Ahab said to Obadiah, go into the land to all the fountains of water, all the brooks, maybe we'll find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we don't lose all the beasts. So the drought had not stopped at that time. Verse 7, and as Obadiah was in the way, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and said, are you Elijah? And Elijah said, I am. Go and tell your master Ahab that Elijah is here. Oh, and in verse 9 he said, what have I sinned that you would deliver me into the hand of Ahab? Because, and he says, if I tell Ahab where you are, I know that God will move you. The Spirit of the Lord, verse 12, will carry you alone somewhere else. I'll tell Ahab, and he won't find you, so he'll kill me. But Obadiah says, I'm your servant, and I fear the Lord from my youth. So, and then he says in verse 13, wasn't it true that when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord, I hid 150 men and fed them and gave them water? And now you're saying, go and tell Ahab that Elijah is here, and Ahab will kill me. And Elijah said, as the Lord lives, I will surely show myself to him. So as we know that it came to pass when Obadiah met Ahab, the king, Ahab went to meet Elijah, And Elijah was there. And Ahab says to Elijah, and I like this bit, this is chapter 18, verse 17. It came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah that King Ahab said, "Are you he that troubles Israel?" And in verse 18, Elijah answers, "I haven't troubled Israel, but you have. You and your father's house, in that you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you'd followed Baal." So the punishment on Israel was because the king had forsaken God's commandments. And I want to say to everyone in spiritual leadership, don't turn away from the Word of God. I believe that the time that we're living in, and we're living in terribly troubled times, whatever nation, whether it's America or Europe or Russia or Ukraine or Britain, we are living in very, very troubled times. I shall talk about this more. We're living in times of probably the greatest problems virtually in history are coming on us right now. I've only been reading about it today, and I'm only concerned in my spirit today that what's going to happen in the next few years is going to see the greatest punishment, the greatest problem facing these nations in the whole of history. Why? Because the people of God are not keeping truth. Oh yes, I know there is a remnant. The Bible is always speaking about the remnant. I know that I meet with the people who pray. I know out there how many of you are praying. But there are large sections of the professing church that have turned from the word of God. And that's challenge verse 18. Elijah said, "I haven't troubled the nation, but you, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed a false god." I mean, you know what happens. This is when Elijah in verse 21 calls the king to get together all the prophets of Baal and says to the people in verse 21, "How long will you halt between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him." And the people didn't even answer. And you know how Elijah gave the test of the sacrifice, and the prophets of Baal cried out to their gods, and their gods don't answer because they're dead. And Elijah called out, and God answered by fire. And we need to get back to this. We need fire and power in the church. Come on, where's the fire? Where's the power? Let's call on God, and if you keep his word and call on him, he will answer you by fire. God bless you.